Talk boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. It appears that in about 3 weeks' time, early next month, on the 4th, unbeaten up-and-comer and Ring IQ top prospect to watch from Canada, Alexis Kubicki will be taking on seasoned veteran Maria Salinas of Mexico, a fighter with a hell of a lot more rounds in the bank than young Alexis has, but the Alexis Kubicki people, the team, they're ambitious. They're confident. There's reason enough to be confident. Alexis Kubicki is a more put-together fighter than her 5 pro fights would have you believe. Though there is a noticeable disparity in terms of experience and rounds in the bank. Alexis has a mere 35 rounds in the bank to Maria's 279.
Yeesh.
Noticeable disparity in terms of experience, rounds in the bank. Noticeable disparity in the fighters' ages. Maria Salinas is 33, whereas Alexis, she's a very spry 19.
She's only 19 years old. Maria Salinas is about 14 years older than Alexis Kubicki.
It's ambitious matchmaking is what it is. Billed as a 10-rounder in the flyweight division. Flyweight, that's where Marlon Esparza reigns as both WBA and WBC unified champion. That's where Mexico's own Arely Musinho holds the IBF, and Argentina's own Gabriela Alanis holds the WBO. This is a talent-rich and densely populated division with 3 reigning world champions within it. And at this rate, fighting these kinds of fighters, it may not be long before Alexis is in the queue to challenge one of them as their mandatory challenger.
Could happen. This will be Alexis's first fight this year.
Alexis Kubicki, who sports professional record of 5 wins, no losses, and no draws, no recorded knockouts, not yet, but bear in mind that this fighter is only 19 years old. They're not as hard at punching now as they're going to be a few years from now, and a few more fights.
2, Maria Salinas, who sports a professional record of 25 wins, 8 losses, 6 draws, 7 knockouts, having been knocked out once. Just once.
Approximately 6 years ago in 2017, at the hands of the hard-punching, always dangerous Kenya Enriquez, also from Mexico.
Just like Maria.
But she's only ever been stopped once, just once, in 40 professional contests, 40 professional bouts. It's safe to say that Maria Salinas, if nothing else, she is durable.
She's been in there with a lot of fighters, a lot of good fighters. Won some fights, lost some fights.
Anyone from Olympic amateur standout Nicola Adams to seasoned veteran Jackie Calvo,
Hard punching Kenya Enriquez.
current reigning IBF flyweight champion Arely Musinho some years ago, current reigning unified light flyweight champion Jessica Niri Plata.
Former champion from Japan at Tsuko Tada. Maria Salinas has been around the block and faced some of the very best and brightest fighters at or around these weights.
She has, in approximately 39, close to 40 fights, she's only ever been stopped once, just once, and that was by an exceptionally hard puncher in Kenya Enriquez. Alexis Kubicki, not being a very big puncher,
Even though she's very active, very busy, she's prolific.
and educated. Her shot selection, her punch picking, it's exceptional for a fighter that's only 19 years old with just 5 professional fights.
But she's not a big puncher. She's not a knockout merchant.
Maybe she will be later on in her career as she maturates physically and maturates as a fighter, further develops and hones her skills. But here today at 19 years old, just 5-0, she's not a knockout puncher. So it's safe to say that a knockout in this fight, it doesn't seem all that likely.
Not really.
Alexis knocking out Maria, that doesn't seem likely. She'd sooner win by way of a points decision than by way of a knockout. The saving grace for Alexis is that this fight is not that dissimilar from the Isabel Milan fight of November last year.
Very similar situation.
Isabel Milan was by and large a more experienced fighter than young Alexis, who was only 4-0 going into that fight, whereas Isabel had a professional record of 30 wins, 8 losses with 2 draws.
She, just like Maria Salinas, had a lot more rounds in the bank and a lot more pro experience than Alexis, but Alexis still won a unanimous decision.
In what was billed as a 10-rounder, just like this fight is a 10-rounder.
So she's fought in a 10-rounder at least once, and she has fought a fighter with this level of experience at least once.
They're moving her fast. They're ambitious.
She's not in unfamiliar territory. That's the silver lining.
Having debuted as a professional in the second quarter of last year, in June, over the summer months, Alexis Kubicki had a very busy 2022. She managed to squeeze in 5 fights last year, so she's going to be as sharp as she'll ever be going into this fight.
It's intriguing.
We'll talk more about the fight as the fight date approaches. Give these girls a closer look. In men's super middleweight news, I'm sure most of you have heard by now per tweet from Mike Kopinger, Canelo Alvarez and John Ryder are finalizing a deal for an undisputed super middleweight title fight on May 6th, sources told ESPN. The site hasn't been finalized, but it's expected to land in Jalisco, Mexico, which would deliver a homecoming fight for boxing's top star. Alvarez is from the capital of Jalisco, Guadalajara, Akron Stadium, a soccer venue with a capacity of 46,000 plus. That's the front runner.
We've known for some time now that Canelo was going to fight John Ryder. It was just a question of where.
Would the fight go down in Saudi? Would the fight go down in the United Kingdom? In previous instances, Canelo Alvarez has expressed an interest in fighting abroad, fighting in front of those UK fight fans.
Looks like he's fighting in Mexico, his own neck of the woods. He seldom ever does that.
Canelo Alvarez hasn't fought there in years. The vast majority of Canelo's signature fights and his biggest fights, his most memorable fights, have been right here in the US of A. He is the face of boxing in the West, the face of boxing in this country.
Looks like he'll be fighting in his own the next time out.
As you can imagine, the usual suspects, the Boo Birds, aren't at all excited to see Canelo Alvarez opposite the ring John Ryder on the premise that there are better fighters, much better fighters for Canelo Alvarez to take on.
This hierarchy of thought, this logic, it only seems to apply to Canelo. It doesn't apply to anybody else. Charlo can fight Juan Montiel.
Close to 2 years ago, that's what that guy was doing.
Demetrius Andrade gets to keep busy with the Jason Quigleys and Desmond Nicholsons of the world.
He, too, is exempted from their criticism, as is David Benavidez, who only fought once last year against the past it, over-the-hill David Lemieux.
Yeah, he gets a pass, too.
Never mind that Canelo Alvarez was, in fact, more active last year than all three of those guys. Were all three of those guys.
David only fought once, and the other two didn't fight at all.
Or Canelo Alvarez took on Dmitry Bivol and Gennady Golovkin. David took on David Lemieux, and the other two, they didn't fight nobody at all.
Nobody.
And it's Canelo they want to criticize. Look, whenever I bring up these talking points, I know that the usual suspects, I know that to the Boo Birds, all of that stuff is going to fall on deaf ears.
They're not listening.
These are emotionally driven, illogical, and obtuse individuals that make obtuse observations, obtuse arguments.
You can't use logic on illogical people.
It's not going to work. The only thing I can do is tell you what I think. And if you want to know what I think, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do.
This fight's perfectly okay. It's perfectly all right. Canelo Alvarez is coming off a hand injury and surgery for that injured hand.
After having a busier year than both David Benavidez, Jermall Charlo, and Demetrius Andrade.
He's taking his foot off the gas, and he's taking on what is considered, at least for him, a lighter touch.
But you will notice that Canelo Alvarez's version of a lighter touch is still better than what you get from David Benavidez. It's still better than what you get from Jermall Charlo and Demetrius Andrade. John Ryder is ranked top 10 in the division, top 5 in some divisional rank standings.
He's got a win over Daniel Jacobs, a more recent win over then unbeaten Zach Parker, who Demetrius Andrade pulled out on, by the way.
John Ryder might very well be considered a lighter touch to a Canelo Alvarez. But to those guys, to David and Demetrius and Jermall, that would be the best name on their resume.
Because that's how piss poor their resumes are.
So you cannot logically talk up these fighters and berate Canelo Alvarez and hope to appeal to the masses.
The paying customers. I mean, that's why Canelo Alvarez has more paying customers than David Benavidez, than Demetrius Andrade, than Jermall Charlo.
You gonna debate that, you fucking idiot?
He doesn't have a bigger audience than those guys?
You can't hope to appeal to them, berating Canelo Alvarez with your illogical and obtuse arguments. You can't do it. You won't.
Canelo's coming off a hand injury and hand surgery, so he's just doing what any fighter would do in this situation, because he can afford to. He's taking his foot off the gas, the same way Demetrius did.
Demetrius Andrade last year was supposed to fight Zach Parker, but he pulled out of the fight because he reportedly suffered an injury. We don't really know what that injury was, but upon his return, he took his foot off the gas. Not that his foot was ever on it.
It wasn't.
But he didn't come back against some killer, some top 10 guy. He came back against Desmond Nicholson, a guy Edgar Berlanga beat up.
A guy Edgar dropped 4 times.
A journeyman? For criticizing Canelo Alvarez for taking on John Ryder, did you criticize Demetrius Andre for fighting that guy?
Jermall Charlo, who's been out of action close to 2 years now. What do you think? He's gonna come back and take on some killer?
If he ever does come back.
What, you think he's gonna come back and take on a David Benavidez straight away or a Demetrius Andre straight away?
He's not.
Then what are you criticizing Canelo for?
He is, in fact, a more accomplished, more active fighter than any of those guys, but you reserve all your criticisms for him and absolutely none for them.
They're the ones that have catching up to do with Canelo, not the other way around. If anybody deserves amnesty and understanding, it's Canelo, not those guys.
I don't mind this fight. I don't mind this fight because John Ryder is in fact ranked top 10 in the division, top 5 in some divisional rank standings. I don't mind this fight because John Ryder has proven durable over time and shown improvement. He's a game fighter.
He's a game fighter who applies pressure. He's a pressure fighter. He's a southpaw.
He's the kind of guy that's going to force you to fight. In Canelo's case, he's likely going to force Canelo to knock him out.
Don't sell me all this bullshit about Demetrius Andre, who got sat on his back pocket his last fight opposite the ring, a fucking journeyman.
Don't sell me all this bullshit about the absentee WBC middleweight champion Jermall Charlo. It's been close to 2 years since that guy had a fight.
Give it a rest with the Mexican monster crap. The guy fought once against an over-the-hill David Lemieux.
You don't need to be a Mexican monster to knock out David Lemieux. Marco Antonio Rubio knocked out David Lemieux years before David Benavidez fought him.
Spare me.
I only wonder that because this is a tune-up fight for Canelo Alvarez, because he's taking his foot off the gas, will DAZN decide to bill this as a pay-per-view?
You will notice that they're not billing Joshua versus Franklin as a pay-per-view.
There was some speculation as to what they were going to do with that. Could the same apply to this? Will they decide to make this fight a regular DAZN fight?
They did. That would send their subscriptions, at least for that month, the month of May, through the roof.
$20 for a month subscription versus $80. 4 times as much. You do the math. And finally, the ongoing situation in men's super bantamweight news between former champion Zolani
Tete
and his performance-enhancing drug fiasco.
Zolani Tete.
The B sample of South African boxer Zolani Tete has come back positive. The former world champion had tested positive for a banned substance, stanozol, last year after his stunning 4th-round knockout of Jason Cunningham in London. He now faces a possible 4-year ban. And unlike the Conor Benn situation, that did not result in a fight. That did not result in a knockout.
This situation ain't getting no airtime. It ain't getting no press. The pundits, the journos that were so outraged over Conor Benn's failed VADA test.
That entire situation that didn't result in a fight, much less a knockout, this situation doesn't have their attention the same way that that situation did, which makes you wonder, is it really a cleaner sport?
Is that really what that was all about, or was it just your way of taking a shot at Eddie Hearn?
Because it seems to me that a lot of people tried very hard to make Eddie Hearn the focus of that situation, even though that situation didn't result in a fight. They didn't go through with it. They called the whole thing off.
Nobody got hurt. Nobody got knocked out.
This situation, to the eye, is a bit more egregious because somebody did get hurt. It's entirely possible that while Zolani Tete was in there with Jason Cunningham in his last fight last year...
Possible? What do you mean possible? The guy was on performance-enhancing drugs. He had PEDs in his system. Currently, he's facing a 4-year ban.
I remember that during that entire fiasco involving Conor Benn, TalkSport's Simon Jordan had a lot of choice words for Eddie Hearn. I vaguely recall him calling Eddie a coward.
Because of what they found in Conor Benn's system.
But I don't see Simon Jordan lashing out at Frank Warren. Do you have any choice words for him? Because this is his fighter.
Zolani Tete.
And he's been a Frank Warren, Queensbury Promotions fighter for some time now.
Zolani Tete.
At 34 years old, he's facing a 4-year ban. The former 2-division champion who held the IBF title at super flyweight moved up in weight and saw himself eventually become a WBO champion. Currently, he's campaigning as a super bantamweight.
At 34 years old, facing a 4-year ban, he'll be 38 before he's allowed to box in the United Kingdom again. That's if they go through with this. His career could effectively be over, at least in the UK. He may be able to box elsewhere in the world.
Maybe in America. if someone will have him, maybe in South Africa.
But if they go through with this and they ban this guy and he's not allowed to box in the United Kingdom anymore...
I've developed a rather cynical view of performance-enhancing drugs in sport over time. I've developed a rather cynical view because it seems to me that it's not about who's on it.
When you see a Simon Jordan laying into Eddie Hearn over what is Conor Benn's ped fiasco.
The same Simon Jordan who's a big Tyson Fury fan. The same Tyson Fury who had a performance-enhancing drug fiasco of his own.
He doesn't bring it up, though.
You start to wonder if it's a cleaner sport that's motivating these guys. Is that really what motivates the criticism, wanting a cleaner sport, or...
the safety of the fighters.
Or... is something else motivating the criticisms? And it seems to me that Simon Jordan doesn't spend anywhere near as much time laying into Frank Warren,
who readily signed Nandrolone cheat Tyson Fury.
And even if that was years ago, what about the Zolani Tete situation? He's been a Frank Warren fighter for as long as I can remember. He's facing a 4-year ban. At what point does Simon Jordan talk about that on TalkSport?
At what point do the same people that tried to lambast Eddie Hearn for Conor Benn's situation lambast Frank Warren for Zolani Tete's situation? Because somebody actually got hurt in the case of Zolani Tete.
Somebody actually got knocked out.
I said it in my previous segment, I'll say it here again. You can't waste good logic on illogical people. It's illogical to go after Eddie Hearn when it comes to Conor, but not go after Frank when it comes to Zolani.
You point out the inconsistencies, it won't matter to those individuals who have already made up their minds irrespective of what you show them.
But I can only tell you what I think.
That's all I can do. And if you want to know what I think, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, there is a brazen double standard in play in the British boxing scene.
There's a lot, and I mean a lot of fucking hypocrites.
So in the sport of boxing, when it comes to it, an abundance of hypocrites will come as a surprise to no one. I'm just calling it out.
I'm just saying.
Don't turn into Sally Struthers when it comes to a matchroom fighter and turn a blind eye to Frank Warren's mess. And what...
Won't somebody please think about the fighters?
You don't care about the fighters. If you did, you'd make more light of Zolani Tete's situation. You don't care about a cleaner sport.
That's not why you're going after Eddie Hearn.
And that's not why you're going after Conor Benn. Not while you're simultaneously cheering Tyson Fury on. He tested positive for Nandrolone.
You don't give a fuck about any of that stuff.
You're just a bunch of fucking hypocrites with an agenda. You don't hold Frank Warren to the same standard you hold Eddie Hearn to. Why is that?
Because that's what I see.